If you're waking up at 4 a.m. and can't fall back asleep, or you're going to bed exhausted but sleeping lighter than you used to, you've probably assumed something is wrong with you. Here's the actual answer. Your sleep really has changed. That part's true. But the reason isn't what most people assume, and more importantly, some of what people do about it, including the most common fix, is one of the riskiest decisions a person over 60 can make. I'm going to walk you through exactly what's happening in your brain at night, why it happens, what's often missed entirely, and what the real evidence says actually helps. Let's start with the truth, because it's more specific than sleep gets worse with age. Every night, your brain cycles through different sleep stages: light sleep, deep sleep, and REM, the dreaming stage. The one that matters most for how rested you feel the next day is deep sleep, also called slow-wave sleep. It's when your body does its heaviest repair work, tissue recovery, immune function, and the release of growth hormone. Here's what the research shows. Deep sleep declines dramatically with age. In healthy adults, the drop-off is significant enough that some studies have measured it, losing the large majority of the time it once occupied in your night. REM sleep also declines, though less severely. On top of that, something called sleep efficiency drops. That's the percentage of time you're actually in bed asleep versus lying there awake. And sleep fragmentation increases, meaning more awakenings throughout the night, even ones you don't fully remember the next morning. Put simply, you're spending more time in light sleep, less time in the deep restorative stage, and you're being pulled out of sleep more often. That's not you imagining it. That's a measurable, well-documented shift in how your brain cycles through the night. Now here's the part I want you to actually hold on to, because it matters for your peace of mind. Researchers who study this are clear that this change, on its own, is a normal part of aging, not automatically a disorder, not automatically something broken. Your brain at 65 doesn't sleep the same way it did at 25. That's expected. The goal isn't to force your sleep back to what it was decades ago. It's to understand what's happening so you can respond to it correctly instead of guessing, and to catch the things that aren't just normal aging, which is where a lot of people get stuck without realizing it. Here's a condition that deserves its own real explanation, because it's genuinely common, genuinely serious, and gets waved away as just getting older, more than almost anything else in this list. Obstructive sleep apnea is when your airway repeatedly narrows or closes during sleep, cutting off or reducing airflow, sometimes dozens of times a night, without you ever fully waking up enough to remember it. Some research estimates it affects roughly a third of older adults, with some studies putting the number even higher, closer to half, at more advanced ages. And here's the specific problem. Physicians and patients alike frequently misattribute the symptoms to normal aging or other conditions instead of recognizing them as sleep apnea. That's the exact reason it goes undiagnosed as often as it does. The classic sign most people know is snoring, especially loud snoring with pauses, or gasping and choking sounds during the night, usually something a bed partner notices before you do. But there are other symptoms that surprise people, because they don't obviously look like a sleep problem at all. Persistent daytime fatigue that doesn't match how many hours you spent in bed, morning headaches, trouble concentrating, and, this one catches people off guard, needing to get up to urinate multiple times a night. That last one gets chalked up to bladder or prostate issues on its own, when for a real number of people, it's actually connected to the disrupted breathing itself. Diagnosis happens through a sleep study, either an overnight test in a sleep lab or, increasingly, a simplified version you can do at home, which measures how often your breathing is interrupted throughout the night. If it's confirmed, the standard treatment is a CPAP machine, a mask worn during sleep that delivers steady air pressure to keep your airway open. I want to head off an assumption some people make here, that CPAP is somehow less worth it or less effective once you're past a certain age. Research directly contradicts that. A study comparing CPAP outcomes across age groups found adults over 60 get benefits that are just as strong as younger patients. And in a separate long-term study following older adults with sleep apnea over a full decade, those using CPAP treatment showed a meaningfully slower rate of cognitive decline than those who didn't. That's not a small thing. It means treating this condition may be doing more for your brain over time than most people realize. To be fair about the whole picture, sticking with CPAP consistently does get harder with age, particularly past 80 or alongside cognitive changes, and getting used to the mask takes real adjustment for a lot of people. But there are now more options than there used to be. Better fitting masks, coaching support, and remote monitoring that helps catch problems early, specifically because this is a well-recognized challenge, not a reason to skip treatment altogether. If any of this sounds familiar, the snoring, the gasping, the exhaustion that doesn't add up, the nighttime bathroom trips, that's worth raising with a doctor directly by name, rather than mentioning general tiredness and hoping it comes up. Here's something that explains a very specific, very common complaint. Why so many people over 60 get sleepy earlier in the evening and wake up earlier in the morning, often before they feel like they've had enough rest. Your internal body clock, the one that decides when you feel sleepy and when you feel alert, tends to shift earlier as you age. Researchers call this a phase advance. It's not that your clock is broken. It's running on an earlier schedule than it used to, and often earlier than fits your actual life or your desired wake time. This is where most sleep advice gets it slightly wrong. A lot of general wellness content tells everyone to get morning sunlight for better sleep, and morning light does help keep your body clock properly synced overall. But if your specific problem is waking up too early, morning light isn't the precise tool for that job. It can actually reinforce the early shift you're already dealing with. The evidence-based approach for this particular pattern is different. Exposure to bright light in the evening. Clinical guidelines for exactly this issue, an early shifted body clock in older adults, recommend evening light exposure specifically because it gently pushes your internal clock later, which can help you stay up a bit longer and in turn sleep a bit later and more continuously. In practice, that doesn't need to be complicated or clinical. A walk after dinner while there's still daylight. Sitting outside on a porch or by a window as the evening light is still bright rather than retreating indoors under dim lamps as soon as the sun starts going down. It's a small, specific adjustment, but it's targeted at the actual mechanism causing the waking too early pattern, rather than a generic tip that doesn't address it. Now here's the piece of this I most want you to walk away remembering, because it connects directly to something we've covered before on this channel. Fall risk. When sleep gets harder, the instinct for a lot of people is to reach for something to help. A prescription sleeping pill, or an over-the-counter nighttime sleep aid. I want to walk you through what the actual medical guidance says about this, because it's more serious than most people realize. The American Geriatric Society publishes what's called the Beers Criteria, essentially, the official list of medications that carry higher risks specifically for older adults. Benzodiazepines, a common category of prescription sedatives, are explicitly recommended against for all older adults across every form because of increased risk of cognitive impairment, delirium, falls, fractures, and even motor vehicle crashes. The newer Z-drug sleep medications, the ones marketed as gentler alternatives, carry similar risks in this population, including falls and fractures. The numbers behind this aren't small. Research has linked benzodiazepine use to roughly a 50% increase in fall risk. And because falls in this age group so often mean hip fractures, that risk carries real weight. Hip fractures are serious enough that up to a third of patients who experience one don't survive the following year. It's not just prescription medication either. Many common over-the-counter nighttime sleep aids rely on an older generation of antihistamines that also carry real cautions for older adults. They're linked to next-day grogginess, confusion, and the same elevated fall risk for similar reasons. They affect balance, reaction time, and alertness in ways that matter far more at 65 than they did at 35. I'm not telling you medication is never appropriate. That's a decision between you and your doctor, and there are safer options that exist and are actively being studied for lower fall and fracture risk than the older drug classes. What I am telling you is, reaching for a sleeping pill as the first response, especially without a real conversation with your doctor, is one of the highest risk shortcuts a person over 60 can take for a problem that, in most cases, has safer and genuinely more effective solutions. So what does the evidence say actually helps without that risk? The gold standard, the treatment that multiple studies show consistently outperforms sleep medication for long-term insomnia in older adults specifically, is something called CBT-I, Cognitive Behavioral Therapy for Insomnia. It's worth understanding what it actually involves, because it's more concrete and less abstract than therapy might suggest. It's typically delivered over 4 to 8 sessions, usually about 30 to 60 minutes each, either weekly or every other week, with a therapist, a doctor's office program, or increasingly through structured self-guided programs. It centers on a small number of specific techniques. Sleep restriction therapy sounds counterintuitive, but it works. It temporarily limits the time you spend in bed to match the amount you're actually sleeping, which sounds like less sleep but actually consolidates and strengthens it. And that window is gradually expanded as your sleep improves. Stimulus control retrains the connection between your bed and sleep itself. Practical rules like only getting into bed when you're genuinely sleepy, getting up and moving to another room if you haven't fallen asleep within about 15 to 20 minutes, and getting up at the same time every single morning regardless of how the night went. And cognitive restructuring directly addresses the anxious, catastrophizing thoughts that build around not sleeping. The I'll never fall asleep spiral that often makes falling asleep even harder. Here's a detail specifically relevant to you. A 2023 review focused specifically on older adults found that just two of these components, stimulus control and sleep restriction, without the full program around them, produced improvements close to what the complete therapy achieves in as few as 2 sessions. This isn't a slow, months-long process for most people. It's a short, structured intervention with a strong track record, specifically in this age group. Alongside that, there are daily habits with real evidence behind them, worth building deliberately rather than hoping they happen by accident. Keep your wake-up time consistent, every day, even on mornings you didn't sleep well. Your wake time anchors your whole body clock far more powerfully than your bedtime does. Cut caffeine earlier than you think you need to. Caffeine has a long half-life. It can still be meaningfully active in your system 6 or more hours after you drink it, which means that early afternoon coffee may be quietly working against you at midnight. Be cautious with alcohol before bed. It can make you fall asleep faster, but it fragments sleep in the second half of the night, which is exactly the pattern many people over 60 already struggle with. Keep your bedroom cool and dark. Your body temperature naturally drops as you fall into deeper sleep, and a room that's too warm works directly against that process. And if you nap, keep it short and early in the day. A brief nap can be genuinely restorative. A long one late in the afternoon can eat into the sleep pressure your body needs to fall asleep properly that night. None of this is about chasing the sleep you had 30 years ago. Your sleep architecture at 65 is genuinely different than it was at 35, and a lot of that shift is simply part of a normal, healthy aging process, not a malfunction. What matters is knowing the difference between the changes that are expected and the ones, persistent insomnia, breathing interruptions, restless legs, that deserve an actual medical conversation, by name, with your doctor. And it matters knowing that if you do reach for help, the safest, most effective path usually isn't a pill. It's the structured, evidence-based approach that actually holds up over time. If this helps make sense of what's been happening at night, the next video breaks down something closely connected: the real link between how deep you sleep and how well your memory holds up the next day, and why the two are more tied together than most people realize.